Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast, the floating on a stream of consciousness with George and David. It just so turns out that both of us may be a little bit under the weather, so I hope you'll still enjoy the stream and you'll still float with us because I think we're still capable of providing you with a lot of entertainment. That being said, David, for those people who may not know who you are, would you be so kind as to reintroduce yourself?
Sure, George. So thanks for having me back on. I am the Director of Undergraduate Research and Creative Activity at Christopher Newport University in Newport News, Virginia. Been a professor of medieval and Renaissance literature, religion, and culture for about 30 years. Came here 5 years ago to open up this office and still teaching here as well. And written a bunch of books. My most recent book is a book on the seven deadly sins, and working on a new book on angels and demons and pop culture, and been kind of working a little bit more intensely on getting some blog posts up. So posted one earlier this week, and I've got another one that'll be going up probably maybe later this week, actually.
What was the one that you posted this week?
On wonder. So talking
Oh,
about wonder, yeah.
maybe we could cover that a little bit. Like what
Sure.
was it? What was it about? What was the body of the what did you talk about when you spoke about wonder?
Well, about the fact that we tend to, as a culture, look at only children as really being amazed by wonder. That's something that we kind of lose when we grow up and when we become adults. And I think that's a sad thing if that's true. And so in the blog piece, I mentioned, my first exposure to Paradise Lost, which we've talked about before, which was in college and just blew me away and changed my life. And then I talk a little bit about the sense of wonder that Adam and Eve have in that poem, about the world around them, about each other, and the sense that Satan has in that poem as well about wonder and the connection between wonder and knowledge. That wonder really is what leads us to knowledge.
How what do you think the relationship between curiosity and wonder is?
I mean, certainly it's very important, very very closely linked, and I think curiosity. I always tell my students who are doing research here that curiosity is the most important aspect of the work that they're doing in research and creative activity, because that's going to lead them to exploration, which then leads to discovery and knowledge. And so it's one of the early stages. And I think if you don't have that sense of curiosity, it's really hard to move forward from there. I do a talk for students on graduate school. A lot of them want to go to graduate school, and I always tell them that in order to go to graduate school, you have to have both the passion and the intellectual chops. You can't have one and not the other. You can't be very smart and have no passion about what you're doing, and you can't be incredibly passionate and not know how to, open a can. That's not going to work. And I talk about students that I've had in the past who, I had a student once years ago who was really quite intellectually gifted, a really talented writer, and could write academic prose and was just really top notch, but had zero passion about it. And so, quite honestly, reading her stuff was kind of boring. It was grammatically correct and mechanically immaculate and right on point, but that didn't have any spark. And the flip side to that is students who would come to me and say, "Oh, I want to go to graduate school for English." And I say, "Oh yeah, okay. Why?" I said, "Well, I really love to read." I'm like, "But that's not what we do." In academic study, it's not just about reading texts; it's about dissecting them. And I tell them that you're going to have to be able to cut up something that you really love. It's one of the reasons why I have, over the course of my career, actually rarely taught the works that I love the most, because I can't see them cut up like that. because that's what you really have to do to study them. And it's the equivalent of what a biologist does in a lab, right?
Yeah. I often think of when I find something I read wonderful, or when I see something wonderful, it's usually allows me to describe it in a way that is unique to me,
Yeah.
that resonates with other people. And I'm curious, if your students write something for you, can you see the wonder in what they're writing?
Yeah, usually. I mean, it's there's usually a good sense that what they have discovered is new and is enlightening to them. Sometimes it comes through in the writing. Sometimes it comes through in the way that they discuss things in class. I remember many years ago I was teaching a course in Shakespeare, and I had the I think it was the chair of the department had come to my class to observe me, and in the observation, and she even mentioned after the class that she was amazed. She walked in to class at the beginning, and there were a couple of students in the back of the room who were like arguing about one of the texts that we were reading, and just she thought that was just the most amazing thing because it showed how engaged they were. And I think that sense of curiosity comes through then. I mean, if you're, and I guess that was the difference for me between reading literature in high school and then reading literature in college. Once that that curiosity switch got flipped for me. I read the text when I was in high school, but they didn't mean anything to me. And I even remember reading in my freshman year at college, we read Wuthering Heights, which is really a fantastic novel, which I've since taught. And I'll never forget where I was sitting in the classroom when the teacher asked a question about something in the novel. And this kid in class raised her hand and answered. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, where the hell did she see that? Because I read the same book, but I didn't have the sense of curiosity. It didn't speak to me in the same way at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you talk about some literature. I find myself not only with literature but science fiction seeing this whole world of wonder. And in that particular genre, I often find myself wondering, wow, how in the world did they build this world, or how did
Yeah,
they imagine this thing? But that can translate into any genre. If you're looking at
sure.
literature, it's a short jump from the story to the author to the time they lived to that which inspired them. And it's just fascinating to me to be able to take a step back and see how wonderful it is. And sometimes I know that this is not the case for everybody, but I wonder why. Speaking of wonder, I wonder why everyone can't find that in literature.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder that myself because as I say, I mean, I did not see it when I was in high school,
Right.
and I didn't even see it when I started college. I didn't get it, and so, and I think that as a professor, that's given me a somewhat unique take because when students say I don't get it, I kind of understand what they're talking about because I was there. This wasn't something that was always a passion for me. And I understand that the years that I went through where I was just baffled by what I was reading. It just didn't mean anything. And I think what it came down to for me was a realization that I didn't know how to read yet. And let me clarify that. I mean, I obviously knew how to read the words on the page, but I didn't know how to read a text and really understand it and interpret it and engage with it and make it mine. It remained for me at that time in my life pretty two-dimensional. It was just words on a page. I struggled in English in high school, and one year we were reading Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, and we were having quizzes. Reading, they were just reading quizzes on the text, and I was just bombing them one after another because I either didn't read or I kind of read it, and I remember we had a reading one weekend, and we had to read the next three chapters or whatever it was. And I said, "Damn it, I'm gonna read this, and I'm gonna do well on this test because I mean I can read a text." And so I remember vividly laying down on my stomach in my bed with the book and my headphones on, listening to Boston's first album. Shows you how long ago this is, and reading the 3 chapters or whatever it was of Tale of Two Cities. And I read them, and I went into class on Monday, and I promptly failed the quiz because I didn't read the text. I was reading the words on the page. It wasn't getting through to me the way that it needed to. And it was for some reason, there was just some kind of a block there that when I finally got to college and read Chaucer and Shakespeare and Milton, that block for some reason was raised. I've often thought as to, what was it that made that happen at that time? And, the only thing I can point to is I had to be ready, and I wasn't ready until then. It reminds me of a therapist who said to me once, if you're not ready to deal with this at this point, it means you're not in enough pain, right? I mean, you have to get to the right point to be able to see something the way that you need to see it. And I wasn't at the right point in my life, I guess, probably maturity, to be able to read those texts the way that I needed to. And, it's funny because I look back on it, it's like all of a sudden, it really is like a light bulb went off. And it's just the oddest thing. But that's the nature, I think, of wonder and curiosity. I mean, I had the curiosity before then. I mean, I was always interested in reading science and history and nonfiction. It was literature that was the block for me. I couldn't get to that level. And there was something that occurred for me in my life, I guess, that allowed me to get access to my imaginative faculty at that point that I hadn't before.
That's really well put. And I think I can echo a similar sentiment in that when I was in high school, it was very difficult for me to even want to think about some of these books that were put on the reading list. And as you're talking, one thing that really stood out to me that I thought was beautiful was that you didn't really read it. You saw words on the page, but you didn't really see the words. Like you saw the words on the page, but you didn't read it. And I'm wondering if maybe I think there may be a twofold analysis or a two-prong strategy that might work, and I'm curious to get your thoughts. The first part may be teaching kids exactly what you said. There's a way to read it, and then there's a way to actually understand it. And if you look at the words on the page, that's one way of doing it. However, you're only going to see a one-dimensional thing when you look at the words on the page. You're not seeing the whole picture. Another idea may be this idea of the world we live in is a sort of prolonged adolescence. And maybe you have to go through some tragedies in your life. And maybe that's what turns on the light bulb is you have gone through these things and now you can recognize them in the story. What do you think about that?
I mean, that is quite possible. I mean, the second point that you make, I find really interesting, prolonged adolescence, because we do seem as a culture, in America in particular, we'll speak to really prolong adolescence. And as a college professor, I see this, and it's the constant lament, right? Is that we pander to them and we treat them like children when they're adults in college. And then it comes to the point where they're seniors and it's time to, put on your big boy pants and apply for a job. And they're a little bit lost. I mean, we ran an event last week that students had to sign up to participate in. And 1 hour before the event, one of the students stopped by and said, "Oh, I'm not ready. I'm not going to do it." And I said, I happened to be in a meeting at the time. So my assistant is the one who talked with the student. And she told me that afterward. And I said, well, that's not really going to work when he gets out into the real world, And so I think there's this sense that we keep our students, our kids, in too much of a bubble. Now, I know that as a father, as a parent, I get that we want to be protective, especially in today's world, which is just insane. But kids have to experience what reality is. and have those real experiences and experience, if not tragedy, then experience at least, setbacks that, as the great philosopher Mick Jagger said, you can't always get what you want, right? And to understand that sense that of regret and failure, and learn from that and grow from that. As far as the first point that you made, I think the key there, quite honestly, is engaging kids' imaginations early on. My parents were high school graduates, not intellectuals in any sense. They liked the arts, but it was a superficial like. They didn't really delve because they didn't have the ability to do that. But growing up as a kid, I don't remember my parents reading to me when I was a kid. I don't remember it happening. I don't think they did, which seems odd looking back, but I have no memory of it. And I mean, my own daughter, who's now 19, I mean, we read to and with her from the moment she was born. And I think that engaging a kid's imagination is vital. And we're seeing some of that, the fallout from the pandemic when it comes to this now, right? That kids were missing. There was a missing piece of the puzzle during the pandemic when they were all locked up in their rooms. And one of those pieces, I think, is that engaging with imagination, particularly as it's connected to the real world, the natural world, that they lost out on that. And as a result, now we're playing a bit of catch up.
Yeah, I think it's really sad to me what happened during that time as far as education. If you look at imagination or reading or just the
Math,
play between
all the
children, math.
skills.
Yeah, it's and
I mean, we're
I'm
going to be
gonna
dealing with it for many years, I think, going forward here.
yeah.
And we're already seeing it at my level, at the college level, that the students are coming in and their skill level is not where it should be because they had 2 years of, learning over Zoom from their bedrooms. And it
Yeah.
was not the same experience. And,
Yeah.
and that's not to blame teachers. They did the best that they could through that period. My God, it was just hellish. And they did whatever they could to make it work. But it was not the same kind of experience for the kids. And the teachers who were forced into that position, really, majority of them had no training in doing that kind of a shift. We asked these teachers to pivot over a weekend, basically in March of
Yeah.
2020, from being traditional in classroom face-to-face teachers to all of a sudden, okay, now you're going to teach on Zoom, or whatever platform they were using. I think it was especially damaging for the really young kids, because I mean the kids who were in kindergarten, first, second grade, it was tough because they couldn't sustain on Zoom, for any period of time the way they might have in a physical classroom, and so their days were shorter, lessons were shorter. But I mean, I'm hopeful that we're going to right that at some point. I think it's going to take a while though, and we have to acknowledge that. And in higher ed, I know we've begun to acknowledge that it isn't what it was. These students didn't have the same experience that students did 5 years ago, that we were seeing, and we have to account for that. We can't. It can't be business as usual.
Yeah. I think it's there's so much there, not only in the ideas of English or math or science, but in the ideas of emotional learning and being together with other people. Like that
Absolutely.
particular time of development for emotional bonding, be it
Yeah.
with an adult, a teacher, or other
Yeah.
students,
Well,
that's
yeah,
difficult to make up.
the emotional maturity.
Mhm.
It's such a key, vital part of who we are, and what makes us who we are, and what makes us prepared to be able to engage with a text like Tale of Two Cities or Wuthering Heights, because it comes through then also in experience. I mean, I do study abroad trips here, and I'm dealing with students, many of them who never mind, they've never been abroad. Many of them never been on a plane. And,
Wow.
at first my reaction was like, what? And then my colleague reminded me that, they were all in high school during the pandemic and they would have had high school trips and all those things were canceled. So they didn't get the opportunity to do those things. And so for many of them who are going on these trips with us, it's either their first time on a plane or their first time abroad or, their first time having any kind of an experience like this. And again, it can't be business as usual. We can't just assume, oh, well, they'll be fine. It doesn't work that way.
Are there some sort of remedies? Like how do you possibly catch somebody up from 2 years of
I
not
don't think you
being
can. I think you can just the only way that you can't. I mean, you can't rush emotional maturity, right? I mean,
right?
psychology, George, and I mean, it doesn't work that way.
Right. It's true.
um, but I think it's about allowing them to have experiences. Making those experiences available to them, but also it's also about motivating and encouraging them to engage in those experiences. They became so used to sitting on their beds in their bedrooms that we get them here now at college, and some of them they don't want to do anything because they were used to not doing anything, and we've got all this stuff going on, and so trying to engage them and encourage them to participate in things it's very important. It's also very difficult because I'm always been of the mind that I don't want to require students to attend things. I want them to go because they want to go. And I have the same philosophy about class, quite honestly. If you don't want to come to class, don't come to class. I don't care. You're not hurting me. I want you there because you want to be there. And so, maybe that's pie in the sky, but there are points at which you do have to kind of push them a little bit, especially the group that we have now, because as I say, they're just, used to sitting in their room and everything was fine. The world came to them through their computer screen. And now suddenly we're saying, you know what, it's time for you to go out and see the world. It's not going to keep coming to you. And a lot of them I think, are struggling with that transition.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I'm curious if how this changes we've talked a little bit about how this changes the psychology of the student. I'm curious if you have any experience with the type of person that's now coming. Is this kind of a thinning out? Are there more people that are going to college that are interested in college, or is it just business as usual? I'm wondering, has this changed any way the type of person that is going to college?
It has changed a bit. We're starting to see that. I mean, let's backtrack. I mean, we live in an anti-intellectual culture,
Yes.
right? I mean, it's amazing that we can do a podcast like this where we talk about ideas like this and we have people listening because we don't live in a culture that encourages this kind of discussion and that kind of thinking. And we've seen the effects of that for many years in higher ed. That said, we still live in a time when the college degree is now an expected credential. A bachelor's degree is the new high school diploma.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, a master's degree is now the new bachelor's degree. Everyone is expected to have a master's now. It's not a positive thing necessarily, and I really think it isn't. But what that has meant is, for decades, we've had people who've gone on to college because it was just the next logical thing to do after high school. And so I would say, at my institution, which is, of course, better than most.
Absolutely.
If our president's listening, the large majority of our students are here because they want to be here and they want an education and they want to go to college and they want to learn. Some are here because it was clearly the next thing to do after high school. And I'm not referring exclusively to the students who come in with undeclared majors, who unfortunately, stereotypically for years have been looked down upon by many people because they don't know what they want to do. And, quite honestly, when I meet a student at an admissions event and I say, "What are you interested in studying?" and they say, "I don't know," I say, "That's the best thing." Because you want to go to college, but you don't know what you want to study. So you're open to anything. You're going to take classes in a bunch of different areas. And, when you hit on the right thing, all of a sudden, boom, you're going to feel it. You'll know it. That's what happened to me. You'll know it. So, I think that we are seeing an increasing number of students who are taking time off after high school, intending to go to college eventually. Whether or not they end up doing that, time will tell. A lot of more and more students are taking what used to be called a gap year, and they're still calling it a gap year, where students, after high school, take a year off to do something else and then go back to school and come to college. Of course, the whole concept of a gap year dates back to the Renaissance, when a student, men of course only, who finished college, the father would send the student on a tour. You would take a year and go and visit basically all the places that you had studied. Milton did that after he finished college. He went on a tour of Europe and went to go see Greece and Rome and all these places that he had studied. And I think that is something which is an interesting phenomenon, and we'll see how it pans out, whether or not students return.
Mm-hmm.
Enrollments across the board, I think, are down a little bit. Not as much as I think many of us had thought they would end up being. Of course, the elephant in the room is the evils of the tuition and the financial aid system, which is just an absolute mess. But college is expensive.
Yeah,
it's absurdly expensive. It's too expensive. It should not be this expensive. But the reality of it is, and I have to remind students of this whenever we have discussions about this, you got to remember most of your tuition money is not going to pay my salary. Your tuition money is going to physical plant to run the lights and the air conditioning and the heat and to maintain these buildings, and to pay for the services. So many of our college campuses now look like resorts, because they have to attract students. And so somebody's got to pay for that, and that's coming out of your tuition money. And so we in some ways our priorities are a little screwed up. I imagine at many institutions the operating budget for academics is not the highest part of the budget. And something's wrong with that, to be honest. It should be. We're an academic institution. I always remember there's the Marx Brothers film Horse Feathers, which one of my favorites, which is about a college, and Groucho is made president of the college, and they're losing money, and they're in serious trouble. So he says to the board at one point, he says, "If we got a football stadium," and they say yes, and he says, "If we got a college, college buildings," and he said yes, and he says, "It's settled. Tomorrow we start tearing down the college," because what's the priority, right? I mean, and that's the satire in that film, is that it's all about the football team, and that's the 1930s. So,
yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. I was rereading The Evolution of Civilizations by Carroll Quigley, and he makes a pretty interesting point that I think fits the moments we're in. And he talks about when the instrument becomes becomes institutionalized, or the instrument becomes the institution, the instrument no longer works.
right.
And whether I think that COVID has revealed that in some way or caused that in some way. And I've been on top of that. I've been hearing some other people in the world of academics begin thinking about the idea of there being more schools for, academics, college being for academics, and then there being some apprenticeships for schools,
Yeah.
and
More
sometimes I'm
vocational
torn.
technical schools.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I couldn't
Yeah.
think of that word. And
Yeah.
sometimes I get torn, and part of my brain harkens back to the idea of like the communist systems where like, okay, you are chosen to go to this school, you're chosen to
Mhm.
go to this school. But I would be lying if I said there wasn't some merit in it. Maybe if we just talked about college, maybe not being for everybody, or maybe of
Right.
getting out of the way. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, I've always said, everybody doesn't have to go to college. We need people to do jobs that are, in all sectors of society. And a lot of that doesn't require a college degree and a college education. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's why it's always been my personal philosophy to really get to know the staff where I work on a name basis, to be able to talk with them. And it's funny because a couple of years ago I was having a discussion with a colleague, telling him a story about how I was talking to one of the housekeepers. And the housekeeper had said something like, I never talked to anybody like this, any faculty like this. And it's just, there's too much of a class system. And, it goes back to the story I think I told you about, when I was on that job interview in San Francisco. I mean, we're all human beings, and we're all trying to pull our weight in this world, and trying to survive and make a living. Some of us are PhDs who teach at Harvard, and some of us are, housekeepers who clean rooms. And I don't think there's anything less important about one than there is about the other. They are both important jobs, and they both deserve respect. And that's just something which I think some people have lost sight of, that the folks who are doing the so-called unskilled labor, who is going to do that? You don't want to do it. And so you should give them some respect for doing that. The guy who picks up my garbage in the morning, more power to him. I don't want to do that job. I gotta give him credit for doing it.
Yeah, it brings up the idea when we talk about class systems. What comes to mind is Aldous Huxley, because he wrote in Brave New World this idea of alphas, gammas. But then in a similar book, The Island, he wrote about this world in which everyone, regardless of their role, is somewhat equal. And it's fascinating to come from the same mind. There's two different ideas of how that could happen. I'm curious, what are some, are there some strategies we could use to take maybe the stigma or the idea of worth out of jobs, or is that just human nature?
Well, it's ego, right?
Oh, that's a great point.
It's removing ego, which is tough. Whether you're a Freudian or a Jungian, it's difficult to set that aside. And I think for people who go through Jungian analysis, which is what I've dealt with in my life, the point at which you are able to become objective about your own self and ego and see it from outside is one of those moments where you go, holy cow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Now I understand, and I understand how I need to really treat other people, because I can move away from it all being about me. But that's, it's a journey to get there. I mean, that's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen for a lot of people.
Right.
And so I think, part of it is a reevaluation of what the worth question means. We like to throw around and say, well, everybody has worth, but we don't treat everybody that way. So it sounds good, it's a good bumper sticker, but it doesn't, it doesn't mean anything unless you actually put it to practice. So, show me how you're doing that. Show me how you are actually manifesting that thought in reality, not just, that it's words. And, I guess that's part of the nature of politics, right? Is a lot of it is words. I mean, I'm writing something for the next blog post on division and divisiveness, because what's going on in the country right now really scares the hell out of me. And the political rhetoric, which is just completely out of control and is so disconnected from reality. It's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And I just, I was telling somebody this morning, I'm so glad that I did not go the route that I originally had planned on taking in my life when I first started college, because I think I would have been miserable, which was working in law and politics. And it was when I did an internship at a law firm the summer after freshman year that I realized it wasn't for me, because there was too much in it that smelled of deception and hypocrisy and double standards, and I just that just I couldn't do that. And I think that's so, going back to what you were saying, I think part of it is how do we, and let's go back to kids, right?
Yeah.
How do we show kids and talk to kids about the worth of human beings, regardless of who they are? Because that's where it starts, right? If kids are taught that when they're young, it's going to stick with them. But and here we are again, but if they're sitting in their rooms on Zoom, they're not going to learn that because they're not really interacting with people. I think a lot of it is you got to interact with people. You have to, and that's that's why virtual reality and all these other things just really I think is a bad way to go. It just further disconnects us from each other.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, going back to what we were talking about weeks ago, I mean, D.H. Lawrence, right? I mean, it's about making those connections, and that's what being a human being is.
Yeah, I agree. It seems that there's this false promise of tech, and I think that it probably comes from a great spot of like, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could
Yeah.
just get this message out to people who are living in a third world country, and they could have exposure to some of the world's greatest teachers, and they could learn. It's a beautiful idea, and
Yeah.
everybody wants it. However, we got to be honest with ourselves and saying that, first off, who's to say the Western education is for everybody? Our history isn't their history. And maybe this idea of, the Fukuyama's idea of the end of history was a mistake. The end of history says that everyone should live by the Western world, when every culture has their own way up.
Well, it's a relativist perspective, right? I mean,
Right.
And I mean, we see this going back centuries with the Catholic Church, right? I mean,
Yep.
you come in and you come into these savages, quote unquote, and you whip a little Christianity on them and show them how to be, how to set up a democracy and open a McDonald's, and everything will be fine. And we've seen, I mean, that is not true. It doesn't work that way.
Open a McDonald's and everything will be fine.
Well, I mean, that's the thing that I always remember about when the Soviet Union fell. When the first McDonald's opened in Moscow, and there was an overhead shot that was on CNN of people lined up around the block to buy a Big Mac, and it cost like a week's wages. I was like, "What the hell is this? What is this teaching?" It just. So I think you're right. This. And again, here we're back with ego, right? I mean, it's the ego of the Western mind that, we've got it all figured out and our way is the best way. And so this is what you need to, I mean, and we've seen this in recent years in the Middle East, right? I mean, Iraq, Afghanistan, which we as the US and the Western world have gone into and we're going to modernize them and we're going to bring them up to date. And then the moment we leave, it all falls apart. and goes back to what it was, because that's not who they are.
Yeah.
That's not who they are. We have to be who we are. Can't be somebody else. And so you can't go in and say, we're gonna whip a little bit of Western culture on you, and boy, you'll be enlightened and you'll be so much happier. That's not who they are. And so they end up just being miserable and end up falling back to, the old ways, which from our perspective, again, relatively, is not good, or not up to, is not modern enough. But what's there to say? What's so great about modernity? You say, technology, right?
Right.
Technology first introduced is almost always introduced for a positive use. Almost always, one of the first things that happens is it's perverted for something that it's not really designed to do. So, even if you think back to the earliest days of print and film, right? Some of the earliest printed books were pornographic. Some of the earliest films, once film was invented, were stag films, pornography, right? So there's always this kind of twist. And if you look at the internet, which it seems there's no going back from, the initial dream of the internet was, oh, well, everyone will be connected. Won't that be wonderful? It was a utopian idea, right? And you look at what it's become, and particularly with the rise, of course, of social media, holy cow. I often wonder, and I heard him speak years ago, Tim Berners-Lee, who really was responsible for kind of inventing the World Wide Web back in the 1990s. What he thinks today, and I have read recently that he has basically lamented it and said it was a mistake. That it didn't, the intention is not the reality of what happened. And we could talk about that with just about any technology, from guns to automobiles, right? What's the intention, and then what does it grow to become, and what's the reality? I don't know. I saw something online the other day. It was a picture from the 1950s of this. It was a car cradle for kids that basically sat in the back window of the car, and the kids laying in the cradle, baby. It's like, we would never allow that now. But the thing was that cars, it was nuts then too, don't get me wrong. But cars then, they went 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour. And now it's lunacy if you're on the road. I don't know. So technology has got, it's a double-edged sword, right? It can be really wonderful, and as with most things, it can be also used for really horrific things. And we saw that with the development of atomic weapons in the 40s and 50s, right? And all the great writing by people like Oppenheimer and Einstein. And if you go back and look at what their reflections were on these things, Einstein warned us. He said, this is not the way to go. This is a bad way to go. And Oppenheimer famously, when after the first test said, I am death, right? Quoting the Gita. It's just it's one of those things, I think, where we sit back and we need to sit back and look at what we've done and assess. And because technology has encouraged us to move so fast, we don't have any time to do that anymore. And I think that's a problem. And I've talked about that a lot in my writing. I talk about that all the time in my teaching. You got to slow the hell down and notice what's going on and assess what's going on and digest it. When I used to teach philosophy, we used to talk about the fact that science can move very fast and philosophy moves very slowly. And so there are a lot of things that we can do scientifically that we haven't figured out ethically whether we should be doing or not, because we haven't given ourselves the time to really reflect on it. Cloning is one of the big ones, right? Human beings have been cloned.
Yeah,
I'm sure, right? It's happened. Now, ethically, we still are discussing it because that's a difficult topic, and philosophically and ethically and that kind of thinking takes a while to work through. But now, the next new thing is out. I mean, the one that I use all the time with students now is driverless cars, right? We can do that. Should we? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good point. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do something. And you brought up a point about philosophy and science, and I think when I was reading your book and when we covered the 7 deadly sins, it seems like this was a time when science and spirituality were married. They're
Mm,
together, and it seems that like that divorce of those two things has made people move at the speed of science or has allowed people to move fast and break stuff. When you divorce this part of a whole, you're only seeing this part and you're forgetting about the whole. Like it's not whole. And you think of the word holy, like this is not wholly together anymore.
yeah.
And when it's moving so far apart, it doesn't work.
Well, I mean, it's a separation that really started in
Yeah.
the early Middle Ages of the profane from the sacred, right? The sacred and the
Oh,
profane,
mercy God.
right? So, I mean, it's that separation of ourselves. It's a
Yeah.
bifurcation of who we are, because we are both,
Yep.
but we tend not to look at them as a whole anymore. We look at them as separate pieces, and that is it's not beneficial because it then prevents us from understanding something that is scientific and saying, yeah, okay, but should we be doing that? I don't know if we should be doing that. Yeah, you can do that, but um, and I think about it in terms of lessons learned when we're growing up. And I mean, the one that's coming into mind is something as silly as, yeah, you can stick your finger in the light socket. You probably shouldn't do that. Um, Go ahead, uh, but so this trial and error and I think a lot of it comes down to experience, right? Experiencing the world. And that's one of the things that we hear so often about these folks who are developing a lot of these new technologies is they are not locked in enough to what's going on in the world and what the world actually is ready for and needs. And instead it's, well, we can do this.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need that. And so, I one of my favorite pieces that I think we've talked about before is that essay by Vannevar Bush called "As We May Think," 1945. It's a brilliantly written essay, as is so much of what Bush wrote, and he basically predicts the internet in that essay, and in the essay he says this is going to be wonderful because it will free our minds up to do the higher level thinking that we were meant to do as human beings. So we'll have the internet, we can look up trivial facts, everything will be right at our fingertips. We don't have to worry about memorizing all these things anymore because it's going to be right there. We can use our minds for more higher level thinking. And, when I read that essay with students, we get to that point in the essay and I say, so how's that going for you? What are you doing with all the time that the internet has freed you up from? Are you engaging in higher level thinking, or are you binge watching Squid Games? It's just we missed the boat on this. I think we really did. The internet's a great tool. Great tool. It can be incredibly helpful. No doubt, no argument. But I think we're missing part of the initial rationale for why it was developed. Which, if you go back to Bush's essay, is this, well, it'll allow us to do the kind of thinking that we really should be doing as humans. And the speed issue is just so problematic for me that and I see it in my students is just they're moving so fast and they don't have time to really reflect on things. And one of the assignments that I give in one of my I teach a course called Hamlet and Hyperspace. It's a course on writing and technology, and it deals with all these issues about technology in the modern world, and in particular how it intersects with the history of writing. But one of the very first assignments I give them is I give them each an index card on which I've written the call number for a book in the library. Ostensibly, it's a book that's in their major, in their area. And they have to go and find the book, and they have to look at all the books that are on the shelf around it. And they have to write a short sort of reflection piece on what it was that they discovered. And I tell them, take the book off the shelf, open it up, feel the paper, smell it, look at it, really take some time. And it's amazing over the years how many students have come back and say that was the assignment that they remember. Because for many of those students, they don't go to the library to take out books because everything's online. And they always will pick up on, they not necessarily the book that I assigned them, but some book that was near it on the shelf.
Yeah.
They're like, wow, I didn't know that existed. And, I just remember as a student in college, the joy of going into the library and going to a shelf because I was looking for a particular book and then looking at what's all around it, what's here. And you lose that when you do things like this on the internet. It's serendipity, right? It's the joy of serendipity, of finding something accidentally that brings you joy. And you don't find that when you're searching on the internet because it's too focused, right? I'm rambling.
No,
We're really
it's
riding
so
that raft
true.
down the stream, aren't we?
Yeah, we're getting to some fun some rapids over here, I always think of the Phaedrus, Plato's Phaedrus, when you talk about writing and technology, and how there's a section in there where they get to Thoth, the paragon of inventors, invents writing, and he is told that this technology that you think is going to help mankind is actually going to be a hindrance because they'll no longer need the experience to understand. Like, you think you're helping, and it gets to the idea of, with every bit of technology we're given, it's a trade-off. Like, we lose something.
Sure.
But too many people forget that we're giving something up in order to get something new. And the newness, the novelty of this new thing, which is often a poor copy of the real thing.
Yeah.
We don't understand that until it's too late.
It's important, I think, when you are going to engage in something new like that, to do a sort of a cost benefit analysis, right? What am I going to gain?
Right.
What am I going to lose by doing it this way? Now, some people would say that virtual reality, as an example, is an incredible tool. And yes, for some people, it can be. If you could go, and I use that word, but it's metaphorically, right? I mean, if you put on Oculus virtual reality glasses and you can hike up the Mount Everest and do that way, fantastic. If you are physically able and financially able to do something like that in real life, do that first. Right. But I mean, if the only way you can do it is to do it with the glasses, then sure. And we've seen a lot of use of virtual reality glasses with patients who have physical disabilities or and can't do, and yeah, that's really amazing. And there's your kitty. It reminds me of the debate over cochlear implants, right? That there are a lot of people in the deaf community who are completely opposed to cochlear implants and think that it's just that they actually think it's unethical. And for people in the hearing community, they look at that and they say, well, what? I mean, why wouldn't you want to hear? I mean, we can do that. We have the technology. And so we could do that for you, and it will improve your life. And we're back with the relativism again, right? I don't know what their life is like. They may be damn happy the way that they are. And so I think we need to take a step back at times and just think about the effects of a lot of these technological advancements, as we like to call them, right? Is it really an advance, or is it just a movement? Are we really making progress, or is it just the next new thing?
Yeah.
It's just I don't know. It worries me. I mean, I like technology. I mean, I like a lot of the things that it's brought, and I've been very engaged with a lot of it. But by the same token, I mean, I miss my record collection, which I got rid of because, we didn't need it anymore because everything's on an iPad or an iPod or an iPhone. And, it's all electronic now. And so we don't need the physical records anymore. And of course, the interesting thing is now we're seeing a resurgence in records. People are collecting them again and buying them. I was at Barnes and Noble the other day, and a new album cost $32, George.
Wow.
$32.
Wow.
I used to buy
That's
records for
crazy.
$5 at Alexander's.
Yeah. Bro,
$32 for an album. Holy cow.
I wonder
That's
what a
just
record player
crazy.
cost. Right? I
A
have no
record
idea.
player would probably cost you not even much more than $32. That's the odd thing about it, right?
Right?
Unless you want to get something that's really good. But I mean, I miss that. But there is an interesting movement toward moving back towards the analog. I saw a story on the news the other day that apparently coming out of the pandemic, there's a real resurgence in the purchase of film cameras. That people are going back to shooting on film and not shooting digitally, that they want to do that again. I don't know where they're getting the film from because you can't buy it in stores. You must have to order it online. But there's a real movement towards that. And I guess the price of used cameras has really skyrocketed as a result.
Yeah, I think that there's something about getting back to basics that people are finding. And maybe that's them just refining the humanity. Maybe it took this world of digital illusion in order for you to see that, hey, maybe the real thing is a little bit more authentic. When I look at technology versus experience, I see the same kind of dichotomy with, it's an old kind of a trope where people say, oh, I like the book better than the movie.
Yeah.
Well, I like the real experience better than the digital thing. And think about all the people, like, I'm sure all of us have read a book and then talked to somebody who's watched the movie or vice versa. And there's so much that gets left out of the movie. The same is true for the virtual experience. There's going to be not enough memory. There's not enough stuff to put in there. You don't get to see the eagle that flies by with the snake in his mouth, or there's all these things that only you would get to see during the experience that would be unique to you versus the Big Mac that you can get in every state, in every country that looks the same. And maybe if we change the incentive structure, maybe it's the incentive structure that is causing technology to be more limiting. I don't know how that would change, but yeah, I think you can see similarities with everything around us that's continuing to happen. This idea of specialization and this idea, it's almost like a theft in some ways, it seems like to me.
Well, I mean, a lot of it comes down to something that you mentioned earlier, which is, I mean, looking at the worthiness of human beings, looking at the worthiness of a real experience, right? So reevaluating the worth of these things is something that we would be well to do.
Yeah. Imagine a man or a woman that saves up their whole life to go have an experience. Like, how much have they built up that experience?
Yeah.
And how much more is it worth to them? And how much have they studied because they couldn't afford it in the beginning?
Yeah.
How much research have they done? And then it seems to me that particular experience becomes much more worthwhile because it's something you have given a lot of thought to and you've put a lot of time into. It's something you want to do. Now we're back to the kids, some that want to go to school and some that just want to go and have the virtual reality experience.
Well, and let's face it, I mean, modern life is too easy.
It's very easy.
Right. It's too easy. And, the idea that we have to work towards something like that is not common anymore. We can get things too readily and too easily. I mean, I'm a book guy. And the joy of going to, used bookstores, hunting for things and discovering things. I mean, it's largely been shot to hell because of the internet again. You can get anything you want easily enough. One of my favorite writers is he became a good friend, Tim Sandlin. Tim lives in Wyoming. And I remember, I mean, I've always wanted a first edition of his first novel. I don't have one. I bought it when it was originally a paperback. That's how I discovered it. And it was out in hardcover. I've never actually seen one. And I always look when I'm in used bookstores, hoping that I'm going to find one. Now, I can easily purchase one online, but I don't want it that way. I want to find it it's the joy of discovery again, curiosity, right?
Yeah.
That I'm going to find that someday in some bookstore. It's going to just be sitting there on the shelf. And I go, wow.
Yeah, I agree. I'm hopeful that people that are taking a moment to watch us find some joy in what we're talking about. I really admire how we can start off with an idea of what we want to talk about, but then we just float on down the stream into the world of whatever makes us feel awesome. So it's really
Agreed.
fun, David. This is so much
It
fun, and
is.
I feel it's helped soothe my soul a little bit. So before we go, as we're landing this plane here, is there what is it you got coming up, and what are you excited about?
Well, what am I excited about? I mean, I'm working on some writing, which is going well, finally. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited about my teaching.
Nice.
I'm teaching an introduction to museum studies course this semester and prepping for the advanced course in the spring, where my students will actually curate an in-person show. So I've been collecting things for them to curate, which when that time comes, it'll be interesting. We'll have to discuss that, and actually maybe
Yeah,
we'll have some of them
absolutely.
on, because I
That would
think
be
that would be really interesting.
that would be great.
So I really enjoy that. I mean, I enjoy being around people. It's what we were talking about before. I mean, the interaction with people is what makes it for me.
I think that's probably one of the reasons why you're so good at your job and you have so many
Oh,
students
thank
that
you.
respect you. And where can people find you? What's the name of, you want to give out your
My
sites?
website's David A. Solomon, SALOMON .com. And you can find the links to all my books and the blog and speaking engagements and consulting and all kinds of other Easter eggs.
Absolutely. And those links will be in the show notes below. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for spending time with David and I. We had a blast doing it. And thank you for everyone who participated in the conversation. And we will see you again next Tuesday. Aloha.